It's earnings week, and we've got a lot of really big numbers to talk about. But before we dive in, today's podcast is brought to you by my friends over at Devolutions and itpro.tv. There'll be links in the description. Make sure to check them out. So, big numbers. First off, somehow April has come and somehow April has gone. It has just been a huge month of just a lot of information, and it rounds out with earnings week and quite literally all the major tech companies, you're talking Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft, and many others, just blew it out of the water with just astronomical earnings. And so let's dive into some of the numbers from Microsoft, because they gave a lot of information and, well, they left some off the table. So the first big number is revenue of $41.7 billion dues. That is a significant quarter for Microsoft, especially for Q1, or to put it another way, a non-holiday quarter for Microsoft. Huge numbers, with net income of $15.5 billion, or about 2 Bethesdas, or what could have been potentially 1 Discord, somewhere in there, but not quite a Nuance, which Microsoft is spending more, and less than a LinkedIn, if you know your Microsoft acquisition history. A couple highlights: Intelligent Cloud was at $15.1 billion. Microsoft still refuses to break out Azure specific revenue. They're not doing it probably because it's significantly behind AWS, and they don't want to draw the apples to Azure comparison, if you will. But they refuse to continue to do that. More personal computing, which includes things like Surface, Windows, and Xbox, and other things. $13 billion. Windows OEM revenue increased 10%. Surface revenue was a pretty healthy $1.5 billion. But Microsoft did give us some new numbers, which I think are worth discussing. They said that Microsoft Teams now has 145 million daily active users. Now, that is up about 30 million from the last number, which was in after the end of the quarter last time. So they've added about 10 million daily active users per month to Teams, which is that is phenomenal growth for a platform inside of Office 365. And so we'll continue to watch how well and how fast that grows. At some point, there will be a tipping point where they can't add that many people on a daily or a monthly basis. But for now, they added 10 million each month last quarter, which is, there's no other way to describe that, incredible. Microsoft also said that Windows 10 now has 1.3 daily monthly active devices. Now, that's slightly different than the Teams number. The Teams number is daily active users, and this is monthly active devices. So 1.3 billion devices now running Windows 10. They also said that Office 365 now has 300 million paid seats. So if you're paying attention closely there, if there's 300 million paid seats, now some of that I believe are consumer, really tells you that, hey, Teams is at 145, there's 300 million, so there's somewhere around a max potential of another 150 million they could add to Teams, but that's not quite a realistic expectation. But there is definitely more headroom, if you will, to add more users to Teams. And so just you look at that, and there's just a phenomenal amount of people using Microsoft technologies every single day, and I don't think that fact is lost on Microsoft either. Couple numbers they didn't give us, which is always disappointing, because they always leave some off the table besides Azure revenue. We also didn't really get much on the Xbox side. We did get that it was $3.5 billion in revenue, and their hardware sales were up 232%, which is a healthy growth, but we were looking specifically more for Game Pass numbers, which is somewhere around the mid, I think 22, 23 million is my understanding of where roughly they are at, but no explicit numbers. So big week for Microsoft in terms of just revenue, and there's no other way to describe it that the company is incredibly healthy. And because of what happened in 2020, Microsoft is clearly a big winner on the business front for that, mostly because of their cloud services and their infrastructure and their productivity tools, especially for remote workers. They have been able to grab market share and dollars off the table. So the question becomes, when will this incredible growth slow down? We don't quite know. Many might have suggested, hey, about now it should be slowing down because people have already moved and they should be pretty established in their remote work. But very clearly that wasn't the case during the first quarter of the year. And so it might be plausible to assume that, hey, this might continue for a little bit, but we don't quite know. Microsoft is a bit more bullish on it, saying that, hey, we believe that this transformation is still continuing and it's going on, I think, actually a little bit longer than they initially expected if you were to ask them about a year ago. A couple things outside of earnings. Excel on the web has a new show changes features, which is going to help do the collaborations and spreadsheets. I'm really surprised this didn't exist a long time ago. This has been something inside of Word that has existed for eons, and so now it is finally available for Excel. Windows 10 21H1 is now complete, so this is the spring update for Windows 10. It is now out in the release preview. It should be arriving on your machine more than likely, or it should be released, I think, officially to all machines next month. If you have any blocking issues, then potentially you may not get it. There's nothing really majorly new in this one. Remember, this is most of like the Windows Hello updates. It's a pretty minor feature release, which I'm perfectly okay with. I don't want to be dogging on this in any capacity. I've been talking about, hey, one major update per year. That looks like it's going to be in the fall with Sun Valley. So that is a big deal here, that this is just a minor update because, hey, it's not going to hopefully not upend your life. A couple other things. We are officially less than a month away from Microsoft Build. That is their big developer show that they have in the spring. Typically, I'd be getting on a big metal tube and flying over to Seattle to go hang out with those people and try to learn more and poke around and figure out what's really going on. But this one will be virtual to very little surprise, but that should be another big announcement, a big event that is very much developer focused, so don't expect a lot of end user stuff, but there's always seems to be some because you got to court the developers before the end user stuff arrives if they need to build things or adjust their applications to take advantage of what is coming down the pipeline. So, if you want to take advantage of other things that are coming down the pipeline, you should listen to my friends, what they have to say over at Devolutions.
Remote Desktop Manager helps you centralize, manage, and secure access to remote connections, tools, and passwords on a single platform. Streamline your daily workflow with powerful automation tools and securely launch remote sessions without even seeing the credentials. No more pesky sticky notes with passwords on them.
Okay, on to the gaming news. Well, we dabbled in it a little bit with Microsoft not giving us numbers for Game Pass and some other things. Overall, though, it looks like it was a pretty healthy quarter for Xbox, at a high level from what we understand. Again, they had a lot of big announcements throughout the first quarter, and the revenue was $3.5 billion for gaming inside of Microsoft in a single quarter is pretty darn good, and that's continuing to grow. And not to mention their hardware sales could have been higher if Microsoft could have been able to make more consoles, but it's I guess technically Microsoft's fault, but not really. It's an industry problem right now with getting more hardware, and there's a lot of products that are not on store shelves because they can't get the chips and everything else that they need. But other things besides earnings, Epic said that they will not release Fortnite on Xbox Cloud Gaming. Now, I'm sure they have a number of reasons. One being like they just don't want it on there because obviously it's their own IP and they want to control the narrative as much as possible. They can make pretty valid arguments that, hey, the experience isn't up to the level that we would like and we don't want our users to do that. I also think it's primarily that Epic just wants to control everything and they don't want Microsoft to take away any control from their products and platforms. This is sort of a narrative that is not unique. While Fortnite did get called out here because it's one of the biggest games in the industry, especially one of the largest battle royale titles out there still today. Other vendors are also in the same thing, unless Microsoft is going to help pay for some things, which they might be and might be willing to do. But there's a licensing thing. This highlights that licensing issue that Microsoft just can't throw anything into its cloud streaming service. They have to have the rights to do that. And if vendors don't want to give them that right, then they can't do it. And this is just one of those cases. The other big thing, which I think is going to potentially might tie into Build, as I referenced earlier, is that Microsoft is relaxing starting in August, I should say. They're going to relax the cut that they take in the Microsoft Store from 30% down to 12%. And I believe this is going to tie in nicely to them relaxing some of their policies, allowing a lot more different style apps and CDNs or content delivery networks into the Microsoft Store, truly making the Microsoft Store app just a front, if you will, or a shopping mall. Might be a better analogy because you go to the mall and there's a whole bunch of different stores on the side of there or different places you can get content. I believe these very well might be related. There was also a pretty big Halo Infinite post that went out yesterday. I recommend you read the whole thing, but a couple things to take away. They're trying out some new anti-cheat stuff, which I think will be super interesting. They're saying no kernel level operations, and they're going to be doing it based on like what the user's actually doing. It's a different approach. I candidly don't always love the way that they are writing these blog posts because they're like sort of like an interview internally rather than like an announcement. That being said, it is a very lengthy post and something you should go read if you're truly invested deep into the Halo community. I'll be very curious to see how this anti-cheat process works for them because cheating especially on PC gaming is pretty rampant, right? Especially on Warzone. Destiny 2 is also pretty rampant that way, and so clearly cheaters have been able to figure out how to get around some of the driver level or kernel level protections that are built into the system. And so it looks like 343, almost at Bungie, is going to be taking a different approach for this. We'll see how it shakes out. other things we know are that like crossplay is definitely going to be there. There's going to be ranked play, and there's also going to be ways to limit yourself so that if you're on a controller and you're playing ranked play and you don't want to go up against somebody with a keyboard and mouse, that will also be factored in as well. The thing I honestly took away from this is that 343 is putting a lot of effort. Not that they didn't previously, not that other companies haven't, but they really start to open up about some of the thought process about how they are making decisions and why they are making decisions. And so it's an interesting look about how and all the complexities of building out just an online multiplayer arena, especially when you're playing crossplay. So again, I highly recommend you go read that. The one other thing that I kind of took away from this is the ability to move between platforms seamlessly. They're talking about crossplay. They're also talking about taking content from PC to the console and everything else. They also open up about multiplayer being free for everybody. But what I really think what they're starting to hint at here is that this is going to become more and more common. That, hey, you can play on PC, you can play on console, you can play anywhere for free, not for free, but your save comes with you along that journey, meaning you can just pick up and go as you desire, which is a pretty unique feature for Microsoft, right? Because they own the PC side, they own the console side, they also own the cloud side. They have these three different avenues for playing gaming content, and by allowing you to just seamlessly move between them, that's a pretty big value proposition, in my opinion. Sure, you might always want to play on your console, and if that's you, that is perfectly fine. But if you find yourself, like if your console crashes or something and you need to send it back for repair, you can go play it on your PC or play it in the cloud. I think that's a pretty compelling argument and a pretty neat feature of the Game Pass subscription model. Other things out in the industry, Sony has announced that they have sold, or I believe it's shipped, somewhere around 8 million PlayStation 5 consoles. So we don't have any real tangible insight into where Microsoft is at this time. Still poking around, but Microsoft is holding that number extremely close to the chest. And I also, part of me is thinking like, hey, if Microsoft is anywhere near 8 million, they will absolutely announce that number, but I suspect that they aren't. Remember, there was already initial supply constraints when the console launched because they got started a little bit later, because I believe they were waiting for RDNA 2 to get finalized and polished, which means they started building later. But I think long term it was the better move. I still fully expect that PlayStation will outsell the Xbox Series family this generation, just because Sony had roughly a 2-to-1 lead over last generation, and for Microsoft to get that gap down to anything less than 2-to-1 is considered a win at this point. But keep in mind that Microsoft's true benchmark for success is going to be Game Pass. That is where Microsoft wants gamers. They want to sell consoles, don't get me wrong, they're selling every single one they can make, and they're not giving up on that. But the true KPI, or key performance index, if you will, or indicator, I should say, for this generation is definitely Game Pass. And so keep that in mind as Microsoft continues to go forward. Before we jump over to the questions, make sure to check out my friends over at itpro.tv. And if you go to itpro.tv/Sams, you can find a 30% off coupon. This is a great way to go and upskill yourself. If you need to educate yourself on just many different enterprise and SMB and all sorts of productivity platforms, IT Pro TV has the information and has the courses that feel more like a conversation and less like a classroom. So go check out itpro.tv, upskill yourself before you head back into that office. Make yourself just a little bit more educated and just have a little bit more fun while you are doing that. So let's jump into the questions of the week here. If I could find my tabs. Because where is that window? There it is. Okay, so every week I tweet these out roughly. Yesterday I was off the mark around 1 p.m. Eastern time. Yesterday was around 2 p.m., but they always get thrown up on Thurrott.com. And so we are jumping into the questions of the week. The first one comes from JNBCK. Says, are there any announcements you are looking forward to at Build? What will be the new and exciting Microsoft Dev world? So things to pay attention for at Build. What is happening with WinUI? Right, that is I believe they're on iteration 3. They're just starting to ship this stuff now. I would be looking out for updates for that. I'm also going to this would be, in my opinion, the place where Microsoft would announce the significant changes coming to the Windows Store, or Microsoft Store, whatever we're calling it this week, because these are the people that will be bringing applications to it. So they could announce the new policy changes, meaning that people can bring their own apps. They don't have to be an MSIX package. They can be Win32 or whatever, and they can also build out their own CDNs to deliver applications through this and the update modeling. And so this would be the place where Microsoft would talk about how developers can do that, more specifically how they can build that content delivery network to be able to service their applications that are in through the store. So those are some pretty big updates. Also, I'm hoping that we'll hear more about Sun Valley or the update coming this fall for Windows 10. It doesn't necessarily have to be talked about here, but it would be a good place to start talking about that. Windows has been left out of the build conversation for far too long, and I think that would be a good place to start to sort of drive interest towards what Microsoft is doing. Not to mention, if they are truly shipping this fall, they're going to have to start shipping some pre-release stuff here soon to get feedback, and more importantly, to check for bugs and other updates that are going to be potentially impacted by this. So look out for WinUI, the store updates, and hopefully we'll see some about Sun Valley. SRRLX, can I use the browser on the Xbox One S to access Xcloud? Maybe. If you have the new browser, technically, yes, you can. I don't believe the classic Edge will function with Xcloud because it's an unsupported browser, and I haven't tried it on classic Edge, but the new Edge that is coming down the pipeline that you may or may not have if you're on the insider stuff should work. So, Ingor Fermac says, any news on the Surface 2 Duo? Is it still coming this year? I'm not quite sure if it is still coming. I haven't heard fully what's happening with the Duo in the fall yet. So I'm still poking around on that one. And is the Surface Neo really canceled? Well, yeah, the Surface Neo was. So Microsoft will officially say it was delayed, but I'm pretty sure it has been shelved at this point. I mean, Microsoft, just because they're not going to ship it, which we already knew because Microsoft already said that was going to be happening, doesn't mean it's fully canceled. But here's the problem. Let's say Microsoft is going to ship it here. They're going to have to update the internal specs at some point because if it ships this fall, being super optimistic, I'm not sure that's going to be happening. The stuff inside is going to be like 2 or 3 years old. I think 3 years old at this point. So it would be super outdated when it would go to hit retail shelves, which is not going to help move things. So like the exact model that we saw Microsoft initially announce, that might be canceled because they would have to update the specs before they could ship it. But the form factor still can very much ship. Eternal Shadow says, between the years 2017 2018, Phil stated that Windows is something I'm very committed to, and I've heard feedback about our store. I'm going to take a bigger leadership role on what is happening and going on with the store and make it really tailored to gamers that we know and we want to see the best of what we hear from. If Game Pass is already out to customers and now on PC, how can Microsoft improve their store now that Game Pass is successful and the Microsoft Store is not as attractive as compared to Steam or the Epic Store? So this is what I was talking about with the store. Microsoft is already cutting their percentage. So right off the bat, from changing nothing like from a physical, only a policy perspective, Microsoft is now giving developers 88% of the revenue that is coming through the Microsoft Store. 88% is much better than the 70% they were getting through the Microsoft Store and 70% on other platforms. So that is step one. The other way they're going to be able to do this, I think, is going to be help more independent developers actually build out their own store, right? Inside of a store. Right now, if you want to sell a game, you got to put it on Steam, and that's fine. Steam is a great platform. Steam is the premier platform, but you have to play by Steam's rules. If you don't want to play by those rules and you want to kind of run your own gamut, you can try to offer it independently outside of a store ecosystem, but that's pretty rough to do these days. So I think Microsoft is trying to build out a store that is much more friendly and much more open, if you will, than something like Steam, where you have to pretty much abide by their rules. So I think that might be the path that they take, almost like the open source model for a game store, as opposed to the quote unquote closed ecosystem of the Steam platform. I think that's exactly the route that they're taking. Kubert says, hi Brad, I'm looking to purchase a Surface Pro 7 Plus or a Lenovo X12 tablet. Do you have any thoughts on which might be the best for a mid-level business to use? Any sort of changes any sort of changes do you see for the Surface Pro refresh this fall? Major design changes or continued minor updates? So this fall, I think we're finally going to see the Surface Pro adopt the form factor, meaning thinner bezels, of the Surface Pro X. That is what I have heard, and is finally happening this year after roughly almost a 2-year delay for multiple different reasons. So if you're truly locked on the Surface Pro and you don't want it to look outdated, I would probably wait until the fall. If you are concerned about buying a device, if you need a device now and you don't want it to look outdated in the fall, then I would run probably with the Lenovo X12. Lenovo makes great products. I know many people who have them and are very happy with them. So the real question you need to decide is, do I need a device now? And if you do, I would probably go with the X12. If you can wait until the fall, I would probably wait to see what the new Surface Pro update looks like. That is the route I would take. Mooncake says, I was thinking, could you ever see Microsoft start their own chip making line like Apple with the M1 chip? They have so many products that could make use of it. We could see the MS1 chip powering the Surface, Azure, Xbox, AR, VR, and the Duo in their phone lineup. So this is a pretty natural conversation, right? Apple has gone all in and has been building their own chips for a while. Now, Microsoft has kind of sort of gone down this route. Like they have these Surface Edition stuff from AMD and I believe Qualcomm. They've done that as well where they kind of customize their chips a little bit, but usually just boosting clock speed and some other minor stuff. Candidly, I don't think Microsoft is going to go all in on building their own chip like Apple is. There's multiple reasons. One, they need their partners to exist to help them build product. If Microsoft goes and builds their own stuff for their own product line, it would probably have to be ARM. I think that is probably a natural conclusion that you'd have to make. But they still need Intel and AMD. Intel and AMD are huge partners in the PC space. I was looking for my Surface Laptop 4, just shipped. Microsoft also needs AMD on the Xbox console. It would be a huge feat for Microsoft to get this up and running. And I think for now, and at least the foreseeable future, they will continue to partner with these companies in the consumer or like end user space. The one place I could potentially see them going a little bit more aggressive and building their own stack or chips potentially would be in the data center, because that's a pretty easier path, because it's a known finite model, because they already have all these data centers and they could build out chips that they could replace them with. But that being said, I still don't think that Microsoft is going to go their full custom route. They might work with Intel or AMD to build custom solutions for their own stuff, but to go and fab their own chips, I don't quite think that is going to be the route that Microsoft ends up going. And then Mr. PKI, saving mine for last. Yes, he is. Listening to the First Spring Daily, it's starting to sound like Xcloud on mobile devices is almost useless if you use touch controls. Is Xcloud on a phone pretty much a bust, or will it actually improve? So what he's referring to here, and again, I'm looking for my Duo, which I have all this stuff upstairs, is using the touch controls on a device. On the Duo, it's okay, but what he's referring to is like on the iPhone, you use the touch controls, and it's really, if you're going to be using cloud streaming, you need to have a third-party controller or an external controller, not necessarily third party. You can use things like an Xbox controller with a clip. You can use a Backbone, which my review will hopefully be going up next week, or Razer Kishi, make the experience significantly better. But using touch controls, while it technically works and it is an option, it's not a great experience. It's not my preferred way to play it, and I would struggle pretty immensely trying to do that. You might be able to get away with like Minecraft Dungeons or Ori in that capacity, where there's limited button configuration, but anything that requires fast movement or even just like accurate, precise control would be tough. I bet Tetris would probably work with touch controls, but generally speaking, if you're planning to play cloud streaming on a mobile device, you're going to want an additional controller. And I don't think that's necessarily unique to like Microsoft's games. I mean, I think you're going to have that same issue with Stadia. I believe you have that same issue with some of Apple's arcade titles. It's the same thing, like on analog, quote-unquote analog joystick movements on a flat surface that has no feedback is just not a good experience in my opinion. So you need to start looking into additional devices if you want to truly be playing cloud streaming on the go. But Microsoft, again, still has some work to do to make that just a really awesome and robust experience. Right now, it's still in the early stages, and it's on the borderline of acceptable, especially, but it fails in like competitive multiplayer arrangements. So that pretty much wraps it up for this week, guys. It has been a busy week, a big week of numbers. We are heading into, well, April's done, so we're heading into the next month here, getting closer to that warmer season, getting closer to Build, getting closer to E3. There's a whole bunch of stuff on the horizon. But before we go, make sure you check out the links below from my friends over at Devolutions and itpro.tv. That's itpro.tv/Sams for a free coupon trial offer, not trial offer, 30% offer for Sam's Report listeners only. And so with that, folks, make sure to always keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this podcast is me.